So let's say you want to be able to max out games such as Fortnite and Apex and every other game out there, but you're not quite sure how much you have to spend in order to reach that sweet spot. In this video we're gonna be looking at this $1,000 gaming PC that is fast enough to run every single game out there without any issues coming up. Hey, how is it going, guys? My name is Robin, and in this video I'm gonna show you the future-proof $1,000 gaming PC build that I decided to name Edna for no particular reason. Anyway, I built this PC for a fellow subscriber and a friend of mine. He specifically asked for a machine that would work for gaming as well as streaming at the same time, while still being able to run the game with pretty good image quality. For more details of each PC part, feel free to check out the links down below. Before we jump into what parts I picked for my friend, let's have a look at some gaming benchmark numbers. Every game has been tested in 1080p with VSync off, and yeah, no overclocking has been done here. Starting with Apex Legends, we're able to reach an average frame rate of 95 FPS at the highest graphics available for the game, with 1% low of 60 FPS. A completely stutter-free experience. In Battlefield 5 maxed out in DX11, we're averaging around 80 FPS with lows right under the 60 FPS mark, again completely maxed out. In Fortnite we runs with an average frame rate of above 120 FPS and lows just below 90. Jumping over to Metro Exodus, one of the most demanding games in 2019, the graphics card, the GTX 1070, is able to spit out an average frame rate just over the 60 FPS golden mark and 46 FPS at 1% low. Now if you're willing to drop the settings down from ultra to, let's say, high, you will be seeing numbers well above 60 FPS here. In the most recent Far Cry, we managed to squeeze out around 77 FPS and with 1% low at 61, with everything completely maxed out. Shadow of the Tomb Raider, again highest graphics, we stayed around 73 FPS averaged and dipped below the 60 FPS mark on a few occasions. The newest Devil May Cry 5 is another great looking game, though it's not too demanding for this build, as you can see. Lastly, we got F1 2018, also manages to score well above 60 FPS at ultra high settings. So mastering most games with everything maxed out and scoring above 60 FPS average at 1080p is typically not a problem. If you're willing to sacrifice some of the image quality and drop down from, let's say, ultra settings down to high or medium, you should be able to lock the frame rate at 120 or 144 in many games. If you have a high refresh rate monitor, 1440p is also an option here, of course. So let's look at the parts I chose and why I chose them. So the goal for this PC was to build something quite future-proof, and so if you don't need a whole new gaming computer but you're looking for some tips when it comes to PC parts in general that will last you longer, I would highly recommend not cheaping out on VRAM or video memory, as it seems like games in the future will be allocating more and more VRAM, and taking a look at the gaming consoles is a good measurement, as almost every game nowadays is built on their hardware limits. And if we take a look at the current generation consoles, they are already equipped with 8GB on the PS4 Pro and 12GB on the Xbox One X, and if we go back and look at all the generations before that, they had a lot less, so expect to see more games using even more VRAM in the future. Apex is already one game that is using 8GB of VRAM if you want to be able to max out the game. Therefore I chose the GTX 1070 with 8GB of VRAM. This card is however getting out of stock right now, but if you can find one at around $280, definitely go for it. Otherwise, picking the newly released GTX 1660 Ti will perform similar to the 1070. In fact, it's actually slightly faster in many games, but unfortunately this card only comes with 6GB, which is a bit of a bummer. For the CPU, this was a tough one, but I ended up with the Ryzen 2700X in the end, which offers great IPC and plenty of cores, and thanks to FXR 2.0, the CPU is able to overclock itself to reach even higher clock speeds when needed, and so this is a great CPU for both gaming and streaming and other CPU heavy tasks that utilizes more than just one single core. Another component not to cheap out on is is the RAM. 16GB is what I highly recommend these days, and the fact that RAM is getting really cheap right now makes it easier to not consider anything less than 16GB in 2019. In fact, this is going to be the baseline in a couple of years time, and if you can afford it, choosing the highest clock RAM is always a good idea, as it can increase the performance in games quite a lot in some cases, especially on the Ryzen. I ended up choosing the Corsair Vengeance PRO RGB 16GB kit clocked at 3000 MHz, and as you can see, we're able to max out every single game without any problems, so 16GB, this is a no-brainer. When it comes to the motherboard, much of this comes down to personal preference. I prefer to stick to popular models with heatsink over the VRM and decent power delivery, as well as decent amount of I/O and audio with some form of onboard amplifier. Wi-Fi and Bluetooth can be nice as well, but again, this is all up to you and your needs. For this build I chose the ASUS ROG Strix B450F, which has all the necessary stuff, including a pretty powerful audio chip with an amplifier. It's built on quality components that will stand tall for overclocking in the future. For power supply, I always recommend 80 plus gold if you're not on the tightest budget, but if your budget is tight, 80 plus bronze definitely can do it as well, though keep in mind that lower tier means more power leakage and higher temperatures and more noise, so you need to have that in mind. 550 watts are in many cases enough. This system, for example, uses around 280 watts under heavy load. I ended up choosing the Supernova because it's proven to be very reliable. For storage, I went with the Samsung Evo 970 NVMe drive purely for the reason that my friend is going to be using some heavy workloads where fast access time is important to him, but for general gaming and streaming, a 2.5 flash-based drive is definitely enough. This 5GB SSD is a great option. Now, when it comes to the case, this is a lot of personal preference, of course. I ended up choosing the NZXT H500i, which is a mid-tower case that offers great flexibility, support for water cooling with up to a single 280mm rad in the front. The i model also comes pre-installed with 2 LED strips and a cam smart hub that lets you run up to 3 fans through the hub and control everything in the software. It's pretty powerful, and if you're interested in something with customization, this is a case that offers plenty of that at an attractive price point. All of these components gives us a grand total of $1,075 give or take. Now, I made a whole separate video on the H500 a while ago. I'll link that up down below for you guys. If you want to boost your FPS in Apex, I made a whole guide how I went from 80 FPS to well over 150 FPS with a few tweaks. You'll find that video down below as well. I'm gonna be back with a brand new video in just a day or two. Until then, have an awesome day, right?